Every story has a beginning, and South Bend's story, depending on who's telling it, usually begins with Alexis Coquillard, the fur trader who set up shop along the St. Joseph River in 1823 and became the founding father who willed the city into existence. Some people push the story back a little further, to Pierre Navarre, who was trapping and trading in the area a few years before Coquillard arrived. The more historically ambitious might reach all the way back to 1679, to René Robert Cavelier Sieur de La Salle, the French explorer who passed through this region and, in the way that European explorers tended to do, claimed the land for a king who had never seen it and never would. These are the names we know, the names that ended up on plaques and in history books and, as it turns out, on street signs too. But here's the thing about Coquillard and Navarre and La Salle. They didn't come here because the land was empty. They came here because it wasn't. They came because there were already people here. People who knew the rivers, who had built lives and trade networks and whole civilizations inside and around the place that would become South Bend long before any European set foot in the Western Hemisphere. The fur traders didn't stumble into a wilderness. They came looking for business partners. If the Native Americans hadn't been here, the traders wouldn't have come here. They would have gone somewhere else, followed the commerce somewhere else, and whatever city they eventually founded would grow up somewhere else too. The temptation is to think that Native American stories belong to an earlier history, one somehow separate from the endless chain of cause and effect that defines the history we have now. That couldn't be further from the truth. South Bend's history exists because of the people who were here first. It was the aquatic network that they discovered that brought La Salle to South Bend. It was their communities and commerce that brought Navarre and Coquillard here 150 years later. Of course, this is all stuff we already know, right? We all know the European settlers weren't the first ones here. When it comes to any American history, you'll probably hear someone lead with the prelude that it goes without saying that the Native Americans were here first. And maybe that's exactly the problem. Maybe it shouldn't go without saying. Maybe we should say it. So in this episode, that's exactly what we're going to do. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series, we're going for a drive around South Bend to tell the important, zany, strange, and unexpected tales behind just a few of its street names. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertisements is made possible by the generous underwriting of all 8 episodes in the series by the Doug Hunt family. In this episode, we're stopping by 3 local streets with names rooted in the original people of the area, and we're going to start on South Bend's south side on Miami Street. You've probably been through these neighborhoods before, but what you might not know is that south of the county line, Miami Street becomes Miami Highway, and south of US 6, Miami Highway becomes Miami Trail. Miami Trail will take you all the way to Goshen. The Miami people were a Native American tribe, and if anyone can claim to have been here first, it's them. The Miami, or the Miamia as they call themselves, have at least one origin story that describes their emergence from the waters of the St. Joseph River, somewhere near its southernmost point, right where South Bend now sits. In this story, the people didn't simply arrive here. They struggled up out of the water, grasping and pulling themselves onto the bank. As a legend, it's striking. As a metaphor, It might mean that the Miami people count their beginning from the time when they broke away from a larger Great Lakes tribe and traveled to the south. The translation of the story begins this way. At first, the Miamis came out of the water. When early French explorers arrived in the region, they did not call it the St. Joseph River. They called it the River of the Miamis because that's whose the river was. Over the course of generations, the tribe would grow and scatter. They gave their name to the Miami River in Ohio, which gave its name to the city in Ohio. You'll find the Miami name on street signs and buildings across the Midwest. As for the Miami in Florida, that's a different story, a different tribe, and a different language. Over the years, the spellings and pronunciations of those words converged, but, and this is important, their stories did not. During the second half of the 1700s, the Miamis were nudged out by rival tribes. They relocated further east, nearer Fort Wayne, into the Wabash River Valley. By the 1830s, just as South Bend was coming online, the Miami people were in crisis, and the crisis was not an accident. Thomas Jefferson had set the template decades earlier, instructing Indiana's territorial governor William Henry Harrison to push native tribes into debt. The logic was cold and practical. If the people owed money, they would have to sell their land. It worked. Through a combination of debt, pressure, and a series of treaties that kept shrinking the boundaries of what the Miami could call their own, the tribe watched their homeland disappear beneath them in a matter of years. In 1830, there were roughly 6,000 Miami people living on nearly 4 million acres in northern Indiana. By 1850, there were about 250 people on 12,000 acres. That's not decline, that's devastation. In October of 1846, most of the remaining Miami were forcibly removed from Indiana. More than 300 people were loaded up and shipped off toward Kansas. They'd get moved again later, this time to Oklahoma, where the Miami tribe of Oklahoma is headquartered today. Fewer than 150 Miami people were permitted to stay in Indiana, scattered on small remnants of land along the rivers of northern Indiana. What happened next is, depending on how you look at it, either a story of survival or a story of slow erasure. Probably both. In 1897, a federal ruling stripped the Indiana Miami of their tribal status entirely, declaring them citizens rather than Indians under federal law. The Indiana Miami spent most of the 20th century largely invisible, present but unrecognized, maintaining their identity quietly, in Indian corners of family homes, in stories passed between generations, and in names. For the next 100 years, they fought and waited for the United States to recognize them. That resolve hardened into something public in 1985 when Miami Chief Francis Shoemaker put it simply, "We've come out from under a rock, and we're going to stay out." The Miami Nation of Indiana today has just a few thousand members. Their tribal headquarters are in Peru, Indiana, about 60 miles of South Bend. If you start driving south from South Bend, Miami Street will get you about halfway there. In June 2025, the Miami Nation of Indiana submitted a formal repetition to the Office of Federal Acknowledgement. It's the best shot at recognition they've had in at least 20 years. Besides the thousands of signs across the Midwest that are emblazoned with their name. There are at least a dozen Miami streets in Indiana alone. It remains to be seen if that will count for anything with the federal government.
"1846 was a good year at the St. Joseph Valley Register, but 1847 is poised to be even better. The Register, under the steady hand of Schuyler Colfax, editor and proprietor, is the finest Whig newspaper in St. Joseph County, and you can subscribe today for just $2 a year. Don't miss out on all the news fit to print and so much more. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Let's travel from Miami Street north, through downtown South Bend, beyond Leaper Park, across the river, and into a neighborhood called the North Shore Triangle. We're going to stay in this one neighborhood for the rest of our episode. Situated just south of Holy Cross College and squeezed into the space between Business 31, Angela Boulevard, and the river, the North Shore Triangle is filled with wonderful street names and more than a few roadways that have roots in a rich Native American past. There's Otsego Street, derived from an Iroquoian word meaning place of rock. There's Ostemo Place, derived from a Potawatomi word meaning headwaters. Iroquois Street goes right through the middle of the neighborhood. And then there's Wakawa Avenue. I don't know what it means, but someone does, or at least they used to. When this neighborhood was laid out in 1903, the people who built it were very deliberate about the names of its streets. Their choices were made to keep alive the names of famous Frenchmen and Native Americans. Marquette and Tonty were the two Frenchmen, a pair of explorers who passed through the area. Tonty as a part of La Salle's expedition, and Marquette possibly before him, but that's a story for another day. Wakawa is one of the words that was supposed to be attached somehow to Native American history. And in the year 1903, there were plans, although I do not know if those plans were realized, to publish an educational pamphlet of the histories of the street names in the neighborhood. If that pamphlet has been lost to history, then so too has the meaning of Wakawa Avenue. But there's another one that certainly hasn't been forgotten, and it's my personal favorite. Parkovash Avenue. Parkovash Avenue is not a long road. It is not by any measure a significant thoroughfare, but it might be the most historically layered street name in the city. It happened like this. In the 17th century, French fur traders arrived in the region and encountered something they had never seen before: enormous herds of bison grazing on the open plains near what is now South Bend. They didn't know what to call the beasts because French has no word for bison because France has no bison. So they reached for the nearest familiar thing, the French word for cows, vache. They called the area the Park of the Cows, Park aux Vaches. Amazingly, the pronunciation of the French term is not dissimilar from the way we pronounce the name of the road today, but at least back then the spelling was more pretentious. By the time South Bend became a city, the bison were long gone, and of course the cows had never been here in the first place, but the word remained, now spelled phonetically, with the letter K, a character that is not native to the French language. So that's Parkovash. Somehow, a perfect encapsulation of South Bend's ancient history. It's what happens when French speakers misinterpret Native American culture, and then English speakers misspell it. Unfortunately, that's a pretty good metaphor for much of our understanding of the Native American world. Misunderstood and mistranslated through a Eurocentric lens that lacked the imagination to understand that there could possibly be another way to live. There were those who came to conquer the Native Americans and those who came to profit off of them. If anyone tried to understand the Native Americans, it was usually to learn how to better exploit them, convert them, or Americanize them. And so whole worlds went unrecorded, languages lost, stories forgotten, names for things that deserved names were left vanished. The people who lived here first had language and stories and culture. The Miami didn't call the St. Joseph River the St. Joseph River, and they didn't call it the River of the Miamis either. They also had their own name for the bison, but the Frenchmen either didn't ask it, didn't hear it, or didn't write it down. So Parkovash Avenue remains, an anglicized French tribute to a park full of cows that never actually existed on the banks of the river that would much later become the St. Joseph.
In 1903, the hottest reservation in South Bend is for a plot at the Riverview Cemetery. Riverview is the only cemetery in town, with the kinds of modern amenities that you want. And with lots beginning at $25, this is a deal you'll want to secure today. Give us a call at 562 and ask for Slick. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Pokagon Street is a short, quiet residential road that travels from the North Shore Triangle, across Business 31, and into the next neighborhood over. Its name is deliberate and important. Whether Pokagon Street was named directly for the man or for the band of Potawatomi Indians that carries his name, it all leads back to the same place. Leopold Pokagon, one of the most consequential figures in our shared history, and one whose legacy echoes loudly throughout the area today. Leopold Pokagon was a Potawatomi tribal chief, but his story is even more intriguing than that. Some stories suggest that Pokagon was likely born Ottawa or Ojibwe, and was adopted into a Potawatomi village as a child before he eventually rose to lead his band after 1825. He was smart, he was shrewd, and by the 1830s, Leopold had converted his band to Catholicism. We can't say whether the decision was an act of genuine faith, an act of political genius, or most likely some combination of both. What we do know is that that singular decision saved his people from an abysmal fate. In 1838, the United States government forcibly removed the Potawatomi from Indiana. More than 800 people were marched at gunpoint from their homes in northern Indiana to a reservation in Kansas. The journey took 2 months. Dozens died along the way from exhaustion, illness, and exposure. History remembers it as the Trail of Death, and the name is not an exaggeration. Leopold's band was not on that march. It took treaty negotiations, clever legal maneuvering, and the political cover provided by their Catholic faith, but Pokagon's band was exempted from removal. When the rest of the Native Americans were forced to leave, Pokagon's people stayed. They continued to live on the land where they had always lived, along the rivers of southwest Michigan and northern Indiana. Leopold Pokagon died in 1841, just 3 years after the Trail of Death. He is buried outside Dowagiac, Michigan, and I've been to his grave. The inscription marks the final resting place of Leopold Pokagon, chief of the Pokagon band of Potawatomi Indians, highly esteemed by all his fellow man. And then, a few words in another language, but none of them Potawatomi. Instead, it's Latin. Requiescat in pace. There's a lot to dig into there. A Potawatomi chief buried with a Roman epitaph in the soil his people never had to leave. Leopold's son Simon succeeded his father as chief and brought his own skill and brilliance to the position. Simon Pokagon became a writer, an intellectual, and an advocate for Native American rights at a time when very few people in American public life wanted to hear from one. In October of 1893, he stood before a crowd of nearly 75,000 people at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago and delivered a speech about what the arrival of Europeans had meant for the people who were already here. The Pokagon band of Potawatomi is still here. They have thousands of members, with tribal operations across southwestern Michigan and northern Indiana. They run Four Winds casinos, including one right here in South Bend. When you watch the South Bend Cubs play baseball, you're watching them play at Four Winds Field, a Pokagon name, on a South Bend landmark. And why shouldn't it be? Native American history is not a thing somehow separate from South Bend's history. It's not even a different chapter in the same book. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Thanks again to the Doug Hunt family for underwriting this episode and all 8 episodes in the series. In our next episode, we're checking in with the American Revolution and a few founding figures who have streets named after them right here in South Bend. I hope you'll tune in for that one next. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.